Thank you very much, Madam. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ambassadors, excellencies, dear organizers from Gateway House, delegates, participants. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all thank the organizers for having me here, for organizing this event, and I would like also to commend the ministry and the minister to support this initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud and pleased to be in Mumbai for the first time. I know already a bit of India, but it's my first day in Mumbai. And I'm very pleased to be here because I always remember fruitful cooperation, good cooperation between my country in my time as a Prime Minister. Remember the visit of my then colleague. I remember also the quite impressive economic achievements of India through the port of Antwerp and the quite important trade, bilateral trade we have with your magnificent country. Since then, since I left government, I went to work for the OECD, and also there at the level of the OECD we had good working parties making progress in strengthening the economy and strengthening competitiveness, and we could in fact also learn a lot from your delegates there. And currently I'm leading an organization in Stockholm called International IDEA, where we have as a mandate to promote democracy. We have 30 member states, a small organization, something like 200 officials, a small organization with small democracies like Barbados, Cape Verde and others, but we are very proud also to have in our constituency of member states, your country, the biggest democracy in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, this being said, let me enter into the subject. What I was asked to deliver a couple of thoughts to is Europe at Crossroads. And I would say it's a very appropriate subject. I think that no one of the European colleagues present here would deny that indeed our continent, the European Union, but even wider, the whole of the European continent is confronted with important challenges. There is the, and it was already referenced to, there is the volatility of the geopolitical environment. We went through decades of development, of evolution, from a bipolar world to a multipolar world to a zero-polar world, and future will show what it will be for the next decades. At least the future of multilateralism is at stake. I will elaborate on this. Closer to our European Union, we also see that in the whole of the neighborhood of this structure, that lots of things are changing. There is in fact a lot of transformation, including via violent ways. There is a lot of unrest, and as a consequence, a lot of migration or efforts to have migration towards the European Union. There is number three, of course, the Brexit, the decision based on a popular vote, on a referendum to leave the European Union. I think this is a fact, and we have to follow now on the consequences of this fact. But I think we can, at this very moment, it's very difficult to imagine what kind of outcome negotiations will give, how long they will last, and to what situation they will lead. There is number four, economic stagnation. Not really stagnation, but of course, compared to your economic growth, an average growth of 1.5, 1.6% is not so high. With differences, with very well-performing economies like the Swedish one, Poland, Ireland, Slovak, Czech Republic, Slovenia and others, but also with countries of the Eurozone, for instance, still trying to cope with these very low growth figures. There is also the need for Europe to reposition itself towards, in its relation with a long-time ally, the nation that came to save Europe at crucial times with the US. There is the vague of protectionism going through the world. While Europe, in the DNA of modern Europe, free market, free trade, openness is part of its identity. There are the threats for the security, internal security, the security issues in the immediate neighborhood of Europe and at a global level. And if I want to complete, making reference to my predecessors here, we also have a series of anniversaries to commemorate, anniversaries to celebrate in 2017. There was already the reference to the centennial of the Bolshevik Revolution, but closer to the European Union, the 60 years of the Treaty of Rome, the 15 years of the introduction of the euro, the 25 years of the fundamental Maastricht Treaty, and so on. Confronted with all these challenges, confronted with all these facts with whom politicians have to work and political leaders have to work, I think indeed there is a need, a very important need for a future-oriented vision based on reality, realistic but future-oriented. Number two, for a rational approach. Number three, for an approach based on confidence and trust. And last but not least, there will also be a need for new political systems. Ladies and gentlemen, let me anchor my remarks to you about Europe at Crossroads around what I would call five clusters of challenges, fundamental questions that are somehow interconnected. And let me start with what was said by the colleagues just before me. It is indeed a matter of fact that geopolitical balance, that the geopolitical relationships, that the geopolitical balance is shifting. And so the first crucial question for the European Union, and not only for the bigger member states, but also for the bigger member states of the European Union, is to answer the question what the position, what the strengths, what the weaknesses, but above all, what the role will be of the European Union in the future. The geopolitical reorientation with United States that are very clearly pulling out, it is not completely new, pulling out of some debates, with a European Union surrounded by conflicts or by fragile states, with a lack of stability and with some power play from the Russian presidency. A geopolitical reorientation. But in fact, to a certain extent, also going back to history. Other parts of the globe than Europe have been at the center of the geopolitical situation on a global level. And so it is obvious, it is not more than normal that due to the economic facts with emerging economies, strong economies, with more economic growth and potential than Europe, that parts of the globe with a different demography, that they strengthen their position and that they, by doing so, try to catch up with European evolution and mean more competitiveness, more competition for Europe. In this geopolitical balance, it is of course also an important debate about crucial values. Europe is and wants to stay the continent of the enlightenment, of values as human dignity, equality, secular states with freedom of religion, and so on. And this is challenged today. And this brings me to security. External security, I already mentioned it, but also internal security. As far as internal and external security are concerned, there is of course also a very important institutional aspect. Do we have the capacity as member states of the European Union to speak with one voice? Do we have the capacity to really build a European foreign policy, a diplomatic presence all over the globe? And in terms of internal security, do we trust enough European cooperation, share data, and defend our freedom and basic values together? One crucial aspect, and I will close with that, about this first cluster of problems concerning this geopolitical balance, one crucial aspect, and also an important one, an urgent one, but an important one at short notice, is the issue of the military security, where, let's be open and frank, the European continent, and certainly the western part of the European continent, has kind of been outsourcing its security issues to NATO, but de facto to the US allies. I checked it last week. Currently, in the expenditure of NATO, more than 70% of the funds come from US contributions. There is indeed, in that domain, a need to rebalance. We, the nations, the politicians, but also the European citizens, will have to take their responsibility to defend themselves in an unsecure world, not to unleash violence, not to create more insecurity, but just as a show of solidarity to the alliance, to NATO, where it was at a certain moment agreed that 2% of GDP would be invested in security and collective security and external security, and where, well, apart from rare exceptions, no one of the European member states of NATO really realizes this. A very particular aspect, and I will come back on this later, is that with Brexit, France will be the only remaining permanent member of the UN Security Council that is also a member of the European Union, and I think that this means something for the debate on the restructuring of the UN Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude this first cluster by putting forward at least 3 to 4 objectives we should pursue. Number one, I just mentioned it, as European Union, as member states of the NATO alliance, invest more in defense towards the 2% we committed ourselves to, have a more active European pillar within NATO. Number two, to develop a real, clear, unequivocal neighborhood policy, to have a clear vision on the conflicts surrounding the European Union. Number three, and this is, I think, important also in the debates with the new US leadership, let's support multilateralism. European Union as such is a multilateral creation. Well, let's support multilateralism as one of the most important tools to combat the challenges, to meet the challenges of today. Last but not least, as a priority for discussion in this cluster is, as I mentioned already, to become a more active member, a more active partner in the debate about restructuring the multilateral structure of the United Nations, including the membership of the UN Security Council. So first big challenge, cluster of challenges for the European Union, for Europe at Crossroads, the whole of the European continent. The European Union as such is not more than a kind of peninsula of Eurasia, where 2/3 of the world population, we share this Eurasian continent with 2/3 of the world population. I think we sometimes have difficulties to draw the right consequences of this fact, of these figures. And besides that, the European Union is positioned above what I would call a kind of demographic ticking bomb, which is the African continent. So migration is there now at the center of the concerns, not only of political leadership, but also of citizens. Well, it's there to stay for the next decades. And so a very important challenge for the European Union in the course of the next years is to answer the challenge of demographic change, of the pressure for migrations towards the European Union, and to turn this whole problem with a positive spin, to give it a positive side, to give it a positive spin. To my opinion, starting from the situation of the European Union in demographic terms, migration should be seen more as part of the solution than as part of the problems. Of course, this comes with conditions. But it is part of solution for a continent where today, for one person older than 65, you only have 2.4 persons that work to finance retirement schemes, healthcare, and so on. It is a matter of urgency to act because we are living in a continent in Europe with a fertility rate down lower than 2.1, which is, so to say, the turning point, the tipping point for the replacement. There is a need for immigration. There is a need for new people, of course, as I mentioned, under conditions. These conditions range from integration in terms of language, vocational training, employment, the rights of people, and so on. But it's time for us in Europe to have a positive, open approach, on the one hand standing on conditionality, but on the other hand, giving opportunities for people that want to make their lives in Europe to take chances and to become really integrated inhabitants of our continent. But it goes by, or this passes by, via a management of migration flows. This goes through concrete decisions on a common border, on strengthening already existing systems to manage commonly frontiers, borders like Frontex. This comes with an acknowledgement of the difficulties to defend these borders. This comes with an acknowledgement of the instability of the neighborhood of the European Union. It also goes with a positive formulation, common formulation about the European Union citizenship and about the core values, and a very clear, not stricter, but better enforced internal common security policy. So second cluster of challenges, to my opinion, at Crossroads, Europe has to face the dilemmas related to migration and has to see it as a positive chance to rejuvenate, to answer the problem of the aging of the own population in the European continent. Number three, and I put it with purpose, not as the first challenge, because the number 1 and 2, I think, are more urgent today. But number 3 is, of course, related to the economic situation in the European continent. We have a very mature economy. The European Union is still the biggest consumer market in the world, but we have sometimes difficulties to exploit the capacity we have to perform well. Our export capacity is endangered by rigidities due to high prices, due to a lack of mobility on the labor market, due to a very long time to market it takes in Europe to bring innovations to consumer products to the market. And so these are difficulties we also should face. This goes through courageous decisions that are about fighting the red tape, that are about lowering taxes, of course, with as aim to strengthen the European economy, because we share together also the concept of the social welfare state that brought a lot of positive consequences, a lot of pluses in the daily lives of our citizens, but we can't take it for granted. We have to deserve it, and also from that point of view, in order to be able to protect, to strengthen even the functioning of our welfare state, we will have to act. Angela Merkel recently said that it was unsustainable to have 8% of the world's population with 25% of the GDP and 50% of the social expenditure. I think this summarizes very well what kind of challenges we are confronted with in the field of the economy, and moreover in protecting this social welfare state, which is a fundamental value within the European Union, which brings chances for equal development, for education, for quality of education for all people, and healthcare, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth cluster of challenges for Europe at Crossroads relates more to the core business, so to say, of the organization I currently work for. It is about the political decision-making within the European Union, not in terms of the technocracy in Brussels, but more the interaction in Europe between the political leadership and the citizens. Today, we have to be frank, we have to be open, we have to be conscious of reality, and that reality is to a certain extent that the legitimacy of governance is undermined. We have been building up through the last centuries systems that today are only partly functional. The democracies, the liberal democracies in Europe, most of them were launched in the 19th century. We have the creation in the 20th century of mass political parties, popular political parties. Today we see that based on these tools of the 19th and the 20th century, we're a bit short to address the challenges of the 21st century. And so we have to restructure, we have to reform the way we do politics. We have to find a place for the non-electoral democracy, for democracy beyond elections. We have to answer the rise of populism, when people have to sit together to make coalition governments, and it is not clear anymore for the people what difference there is between a social democrat and a Christian democrat, for instance, and even mainstream liberal parties. It is, of course, obvious that people that don't agree with political proposals, with decisions by governments formed by these mainstream parties, that these people would tend to make up their minds for the extremes, and this is what currently is happening in the European Union, the European continent, and we should find an answer to that. There is also the replacement of the traditional distinction between left and right by the distinction by what I would call the web people on the one hand, the assertive, well-educated, open people, people that feel strong enough to fight for their ideas, that see a bright future in front of us, and on the other hand, not only the web people, but the wall people that just stand aside and see things happening and want to be part of democracy, want to also be part of the society to the full extent, but that don't have the opportunities to do so. And this can sound theoretically, but I think together with the pro and contra European integration, that this is a divide which now goes through the democracies that will be asked for election, that will be called upon elections in the course of the next months. We will have in March important elections in the Netherlands, and we will afterwards have in April and May elections in France, and in Germany in September. France, Germany, the two big founding fathers of the European Union. Well, there it is also about a confrontation between those people that want step by step, in accordance to the Schuman Doctrine, step by step, complete, go for more integration, for strengthening multilateral cooperation on the European continent, people like Angela Merkel, like the mainstream popular parties, maybe Mr. Macron in France, and on the other hand, more extreme, more populist parties that in fact want to destruct the European Union for all kinds of reasons. So the fourth cluster, besides this issue of the place of Europe on the global stage, the international and global security policy, besides the issues of demography and migration, and besides strengthening the economy, the fourth cluster is about reorganizing, improving the political decision-making, strengthening the legitimacy of policy, have inclusive democracies, and make a clear choice in favor of strengthening European integration. Of course, a Europe that can be improved in terms of delivery, in terms of legitimacy. Europe is big on small things and is sometimes small on big things. This has to change. We are aware of the problems, but let's not unfold what has step by step during decades been built up and which brings now a lot of positive aspects in daily lives of people. Last but not least, but there I will be very brief because the room is full of specialists, there is a need, as far as Europe is concerned, to be in accordance with its identity. The European integration is based on the principle that when you make people work together from an economic point of view, when you open markets for each other, that you avoid a repetition of conflict. This multilateral construction of the European integration is all about that. And if we want to avoid history to restart again, to come back again, well then we should, as European Union, continue to fight for free trade. Okay, the Doha round is still stuck, and block-to-block negotiations are difficult, especially in the European decision-making system. It's not always easy. We've seen with the treaty between the European Union and Canada even that there were some difficulties, but protectionism is not a solution. And being so-called in favor of free enterprise, but building walls and be against of free trade, this doesn't go together in a sustainable way. You can have such a narrative for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months, but I'm sure that even in the US at a certain moment, the common sense will come back. Free enterprise, progress goes together with free trade, of course in acceptable conditions. But so let's, in terms of the European Union at Crossroads, let's be clear, Europe should make its choice for enhancing, for deepening the free market. And let me just say a couple of words about the Brexit dossier from that point of view. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that for all politicians, and also for me goes that we have to fully respect when, based on a popular vote, a nation chooses to take a decision which is a bit contrary to what our own opinion is, and so we fully respect the outcome of the referendum on Great Britain leaving the European Union, but I'm convinced that it will be very tough times, not only to reach an agreement on a calendar of negotiation, but also to reach goals, to reach agreements for that negotiation. And for instance, doing that in the course of 2 years, that seems to me quite unrealistic. And so my hope is that in the coming 3 to 4, 5 years that might be needed to reach an agreement on the conditions of this Brexit consequence of the choice of Great Britain, that there will be enough common sense and that all parties around the table will keep at the center of their discussion the interest of the population. To just name one figure, the trade between the UK and the European Union, as of today, 45% of the exports of the UK are towards the European Union. For the European Union, it's only 8%. I hope that people realize in London that this is really not the best position to start negotiations, and that they will go beyond the quite popular, sometimes populist positions they have taken without thinking enough, I think, about the next steps and about finding an agreement, not with their own, but with 27 other member states of the European Union. I conclude. So, to my opinion, in terms of the European Union, when you take the agenda of Europe at Crossroads, I would say there is a very big necessity to clear up, to make up our minds in terms of our position at the global stage. What is our role in guaranteeing peace in the neighborhood of the European Union, but also further? How do we take the NATO alliance serious, including in putting enough money on the table to take up the duties of the solidarity? Number two, it is about managing migration, trying to make a shift towards a positive approach of migration as one of these solutions to the aging of the population on the European continent, of course, under conditions. It is three, about reviving our economy. It's four, about strengthening the political system and trying to find answers to the wave of populism in almost all the member states of the European Union, but in 2017, very importantly, in Germany and France, the founding fathers and the pillars of the European construction. It is, last but not least, to continue to be fighting for free trade, because there, at the end, is progress for all nations concerned. Let me just conclude in pointing at the specific interaction between India and the European Union. I would just like to refer to some good discussions that have taken place last year between the European Union and India, with some good conclusions. I hope that these conclusions of the EU-India summit of last year provide us with a roadmap to strengthen the interaction between the Union and India. We are sometimes a bit envious for the progress you make. We can't make so much progress anymore, but we have lots of things to learn from your own dynamism. And we are, of course, also at your disposal to try to help to make that progress and to make that progress also available for the whole of your population, as your minister has underlined it should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We now welcome the Honourable Ravi Shankar.